My son screamed, "Get out or I'll call the cops," so I left and called the realtor instead. He thought I had nowhere to go. I had 3 offers by sunset. It was one of those perfect California afternoons. Golden sunlight painted the neat lawns, wine glasses clinked softly, and happy voices floated through the air like a sweet song. My son David had invited his usual friends over, work buddies, some guys from his tennis club, and a few neighbors from down the street. Me. I stayed where I always stayed. Out of the way. In the kitchen, I pulled fresh chocolate chip cookies from the oven. It was my grandmother's old recipe. I put them on a pretty plate, cleaned my hands, and walked outside with the same careful steps I'd learned as a young wife. The backyard was full of talking and laughing. David stood right in the middle, beer in hand, telling stories too loud. His dark hair caught the sunlight as he moved his hands around. I saw his wife Sarah give me a quick look, then turn away. "Fresh cookies, everyone," I said quietly, holding out the plate. Some people took one just to be nice. One man took a bite and smiled. That's when David laughed. "Oh, she just kind of lives here," he said, waving his hand at me like I was a piece of furniture. The laughter that came next wasn't mean, just uncomfortable, but it still felt like being slapped. I didn't say anything. I just stood there holding that plate, trying not to let my hands shake. I looked down at my shoes. Sarah wouldn't look at me. Nobody told him to stop. Nobody said that was wrong. I turned around, went back inside, and put the plate on the counter. I spent the rest of the day picking up empty glasses, washing dishes, and cleaning up. Nobody said thank you. When the last friend left and Sarah's high heels clicked up the stairs, I was still wiping the kitchen counter until it shined. David walked behind me and mumbled, "Thanks, Evelyn," then disappeared. Not Mom. Not even mother-in-law. Just Evelyn. 3 days later, I was alone in the kitchen making my morning tea. I reached up to get a cup and accidentally knocked a tall glass off the shelf. It crashed on the floor with a loud sound that echoed through the house. "Darn it," I whispered to myself, bending down to pick up the pieces. I didn't even hear David come in. "What did you break now?" he snapped. "I'm so sorry. He held up his hand to stop me. "You need to know your place," he said, his voice tight and angry. "Don't think you have some right to be here." I looked up at him, still holding pieces of glass. "Look," he said sharply. "You think just because you're old, you deserve everything. You think living here is some kind of prize for being difficult and making messes. I didn't mean to. I swear," he hissed. "If you don't get out of this house, I'll call the cops." Froze. David had always been rude, but this was different. "I'm your mother," I said softly. "You think that matters?" he cut in, pulling his phone from his pocket. "Get out now or I swear." I thought he was just trying to scare me until I saw him tap the screen. I heard the dial tone and watched him put the phone to his ear. "Hello, yes," he said calmly. "I need to report someone trespassing." I didn't hear the rest. I walked past him, out the back door, into the garden where my roses and daisies still bloomed. I stood among them, breathing hard, the sun suddenly too bright. This garden had been mine. The dirt under my nails, the seeds I planted, the afternoons I spent caring for each flower with love and hope. It was the only place in this house that still felt like me. And yet, even here, his voice reached me, sharp and sure, talking to someone on the phone. He was really doing it. He was calling the police. Standing there barefoot on the back patio, surrounded by everything I had grown, I understood something I hadn't wanted to face for months, maybe years. David didn't see me as a mother. Not anymore. He saw me as a problem, something embarrassing, a burden to get rid of. And for the first time since my husband Robert died, I didn't feel old and tired. I felt awake. Cold and awake. This wasn't my home anymore, but it was still my house. And now, for the first time in a long time, I was going to act like it. It was spring of 1984 when Robert and I first walked into the old house on a quiet street in a sleepy California town. The paint was peeling, the floors made noise with every step, and the kitchen looked like it hadn't been touched since the 1950s. But to us, it was a palace. We had been married 17 years by then. 17 years of working hard, saving every penny. We didn't go to Hawaii for our honeymoon. We went to a borrowed cabin up north, cooked soup on a tiny stove, and drank hot chocolate under one blanket. That was our way. No fancy stuff, just hard work. Robert ran his hand along the stair railing that day and smiled like a man seeing his dreams come true. "It's got good bones," he said. "Like us." And so we bought it. The tired house with broken shutters and a messy yard, and made it our home. I remember painting the living room walls together one summer morning. Robert balanced on a ladder in old jeans, humming country songs. David, just 7 years old, danced barefoot on the plastic sheets, his hair messy and wild. "Careful, buddy," Robert warned him, smiling. "Or Mama's going to paint you instead of the walls." David giggled, spinning in circles, already with a spot of blue paint on his nose. We didn't have much money, but we had warmth. Dinners on the front porch, homemade Halloween costumes, curtains I sewed myself, a backyard garden that was more weeds than vegetables, but mine all the same. That house watched us become a family. It watched me cry when Robert got laid off, then cheer when he found work fixing air conditioners. It saw birthdays, scraped knees, school projects, sleepless nights. Our memories were built right into its walls. And when Robert got sick in 2007, it became our final chapter together. We moved his bed downstairs because stairs became too hard. I cooked soup and rubbed his back through the worst nights. He passed away quietly one morning in that same room, sunlight streaming through the window. I stayed in the house another 4 years after that. Every creak, every corner carried his voice. Sometimes I'd walk past the living room and swear I could hear him humming. But sadness has a way of making even the warmest places feel empty. In 2012, David suggested I move in with him and Sarah. "It'll be better for everyone," he said. "You won't be alone anymore, and we've got the room now." First I said no. The house was mine after all. It wasn't fancy, but it was mine. And it still smelled faintly of Robert's cologne. But being alone is a tricky thing. Can make even ghosts feel like company. So I agreed. I packed up my life, the wedding photos, the dishes, the memories, and gave the keys to a property manager to rent the house out for money. I moved into the guest room of David's big 2-story house, thinking I'd be surrounded by warmth again. First it was nice. David brought me coffee. Sarah helped me put up my pictures. I thought, maybe this is the next chapter. A shared home, a second chance at being close to family. But over time things changed. Sarah started moving my things around. My knitting basket disappeared. My old clock was replaced by a fancy digital one. The home began to feel less like ours and more like theirs, like I was just visiting. Then came the rules. No cooking with onions. The smell stays. No watching TV after 9 p.m. No friends over without asking first. One day, Sarah told me gently that my flower pots on the patio made the space look messy. I moved them. I always did what they asked. But something inside me had started to change. There's a special kind of heartbreak that comes not from strangers, but from someone you raised, someone you once held in your arms while they cried over skinned knees and lost toys. Still I held on. I told myself it was temporary, that family meant being patient. What David didn't know and never thought to ask was that the old house, the one Robert and I bought and built a life in, it still belonged to me. The title, the deed, every inch of wood and tile. Even after I moved out, I never gave ownership to anyone else. Not to David, not to anyone. I kept the papers in a locked drawer, tucked behind old letters and photographs, because something in me, even in the early days, didn't fully trust the comfort they offered. Maybe it was mother's instinct. Maybe it was just knowing that some things, like home, shouldn't be given away too easily. And as I sat in the small guest room of David's house, remembering Robert's smile, the smell of paint, and our son's giggles echoing through the walls of our half-fixed home, I realized this. I had given enough. When David married Sarah, I thought it would be a good thing. She was quiet, polite, always said please and thank you, the kind of woman who remembered birthdays and never interrupted. But what I didn't realize then was that Sarah's quietness would become a shelter. Not for me, but for David's cruelty. It started small, as these things often do. "Mom, maybe don't cook with garlic. The smell sticks around. Could we avoid fried foods during the week? It just doesn't feel clean. Can you try to be in your room by 8:30? We're trying to create a peaceful nighttime routine." First, I didn't complain. I didn't want to be trouble. I cleaned up after myself, kept my shoes by the door, folded my clothes smaller than necessary. Then it was no guests, no music unless with headphones, no hanging laundry outside, no buying more plants. They crowded the look. Eventually, I realized my world had shrunk to a single room and a single job: stay invisible. I was allowed to cook, clean, and water the yard, but not change it, not live in it. I became what David once told his friends. I liked being helpful, but it felt less like help and more like being a servant. She never said thank you. She didn't have to. I swept the porch every morning. I made their lunches when Sarah worked late. I watered her rose bushes even when she forgot they existed. I was the unpaid maid, the ghost in the hallway. But ghosts hear things. One night, I came downstairs quietly to warm a glass of milk. I stopped at the edge of the kitchen when I heard them talking in the living room. "She's just always there," David said. Sarah mumbled something I couldn't catch. "She's draining us," David continued. "She's exhausting, like emotional baggage." I stood there in the dark, holding the glass, my hands shaking. The hallway was cold, but my ears burned. Emotional baggage. That's what I had become to him. Not a mother, not a widow trying to find peace with the only family she had left, but a pile of unwanted junk in the corner. I backed away before they saw me and sat alone in my room for hours. The milk long forgotten. But I didn't say anything. Not the next morning, not the one after. That's the thing about staying quiet. It isn't weakness. It's keeping track. And I was taking notes. David didn't yell often. He preferred the slow drip of disrespect. But one evening he slipped. We were having dinner with two of Sarah's friends. Fancy types who called themselves consultants but didn't seem to consult on anything but expensive restaurants and designer handbags. The table was set perfectly. I had spent the day making pot roast, mashed potatoes, and green beans. Everything from scratch. It smelled like a memory from better years. Halfway through dinner, one of the women said, "This roast is incredible. Did you cook it, Sarah?" David laughed without missing a beat. "Oh God, no. That's our live-in help's specialty." The room went quiet for a second too long, then they laughed. Shallow, fake laughter. I didn't say a word. I simply smiled. Sarah glanced at me and then quickly looked down. Live-in help. That's what he called me. To strangers in my presence. In the house that Robert and I had built from pennies and hope. I excused myself before dessert. I didn't cry. I didn't slam doors. But I didn't sleep that night either. I sat in bed and stared at the ceiling, hearing every word he'd ever said stack themselves into walls between us. He wasn't the boy I raised. The boy I raised held my hand during thunderstorms because he was scared. He used to say, "You're my favorite person, Mama." That boy disappeared somewhere along the way, perhaps replaced by ambition, by resentment, by a version of being grown up that had no room for gentleness. But he forgot something. Something important. The house he now ruled with his granite countertops and fancy appliances. It still belonged to me. It always had. And the woman he called live-in help. She still had the deed. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon. One of those quiet hours when the sun was lazy through the blinds and the house smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. I was folding laundry, mine, David's, Sarah's. I'd even matched their socks. Old habits die hard. David came into the room holding a thin folder. He sat across from me, crossed his legs like a businessman about to make a deal. "Mom," he began too smoothly. "I need a favor." I looked up from the laundry. "What kind of favor?" He smiled. The tight kind that doesn't quite reach the eyes. "Just something simple. Paperwork, really. It's about the house." My body went stiff. What about it? It would just make things easier if it were in my name. You know, for tax stuff, refinancing, loan applications. Nothing changes. You'd still live here, of course. Still live here. In my own house. I don't think that's necessary, I said quietly, folding a towel with careful hands. David sighed as if I were being difficult. It's just a signature. You wouldn't even have to go anywhere. Harold could notarize it, if he's still alive. I looked him square in the eyes. No. The silence that followed was thick. No. He echoed as if the word itself offended him. No, David. That house is still in my name. It's the only thing your father and I built together. I'm not signing it away. His lips got thin. He stood up quickly and left the room. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. A week later, I got a phone call from my bank. They had questions about a loan application tied to my address. Confused, I asked for more information. That's when I learned that David had tried to get a home loan using my house. Using fake papers that said he was the owner. Asked for copies. The bank, sensing something was fishy, agreed. There it was. My son's signature on papers claiming he owned the house, that he had inherited the property, that he was now taking care of his elderly mother and handling all money decisions. I stared at the papers for a long time, my hands shaking. This wasn't just about disrespect anymore. This was stealing. Later that evening, I confronted him calmly. I didn't raise my voice. I talked to the bank, I said, standing in the doorway of his perfect kitchen. I know what you did. He didn't even flinch. He poured himself a glass of water. You shouldn't be snooping around in things you don't understand, Mom. I understand perfectly, I said. You tried to steal my house. He leaned against the counter, sipping his water, then set the glass down and looked at me. Look, he said, voice suddenly sharp. You're not getting any younger. You don't work. You don't contribute. All you do is take up space. I take care of this house, I said. I cook, clean. You exist, he interrupted. Like wallpaper. It hurt. But I stood my ground. And still, I said, it's my name on the deed. His face twisted. For a second I saw something, panic, rage, entitlement, flash behind his eyes. Then he laughed, a dry, humorless sound. You think that matters, he said. You think that paper means something. I said nothing. You don't own this house, Mom, he spat. Not really. You live here because we let you. Because I had a moment of guilt and thought maybe it would be nice to have family around. But let's be honest. Nobody kept you here out of love. I felt those words land one by one like stones on a grave. He wasn't finished. And if you won't cooperate, he said, stepping closer, then maybe you shouldn't be here at all. What does that mean? It means, he said slowly, you have 1 week to leave or I will call the police and tell them you're trespassing. That was the moment I realized my son didn't just want me gone. He wanted everything. He wanted the house, the history, the inheritance, the freedom to erase me without consequences. He mistook my silence for giving up. But he forgot something important. I wasn't the one trespassing. I was the one who owned the land beneath his feet. It was just past 2 o'clock in the morning when I got up from bed without making a sound. I moved slowly, carefully. After all, I'd practiced this night in my head for weeks. The house was still. Sarah was likely asleep in the upstairs bedroom. David too. Or maybe not. He had a habit of playing games on his phone under the covers until the battery died. Whatever he was doing, I didn't care anymore. I opened my closet and took out the small suitcase I hadn't touched in years. Inside I packed the basics. A few pieces of clean clothing, my worn leather purse, the marriage certificate Robert and I signed in 1968, his death certificate, and most importantly, the title deed to the house. My hand touched the photograph I'd kept in a silver frame on my nightstand. Robert in his wedding suit, grinning like a teenager, and me in that white dress Mama helped me make. I tucked it into the case, wrapped in cloth as carefully as if it were made of glass. Then I sat at my little desk and wrote a note. It wasn't long. I didn't need it to be. David, I don't hate you, but I'm done begging for space in a home I paid for with my life. I have nothing left to give and nothing left to ask. I folded the paper and left it under the ceramic teapot Sarah always ignored on the counter. Then I put on my shoes and walked out the back door for the last time. The early spring air was cool, and it carried that strange mix of jasmine and city smells. As I walked down the street, suitcase rolling softly behind me, I didn't look back once. I checked into a small motel off the highway. Clean, simple, the kind of place where no one asks questions as long as you paid in cash. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, staring at the plastic-wrapped cups by the sink, the flickering TV screen with late-night talk shows on silent. Then I reached into my handbag and pulled out the card I had been keeping. Harold Brennan, retired lawyer, my husband's best friend since high school. He had been at our wedding. He had been there when Robert got sick. He had been there when Robert passed. And thank God he was still alive. I dialed the number. "Evelyn," he said, voice sleepy but alert. "Everything okay?" "I need to talk," I said. "Today." He didn't ask why. He just said, 9 a.m. My place. I barely slept that night. Not from fear, but from the strange calm that had settled in my chest, the kind that follows the final page of a long, painful book. At 8:45 a.m., I rang Harold's doorbell. He lived in a small house surrounded by orange trees and hummingbirds. He opened the door in a sweater and slippers, his reading glasses sitting on top of his head. "Come in," he said. "You look tired, but you always did first thing in the morning." I laughed the first time in weeks. We sat at his kitchen table while I laid out the papers. The deed, the original purchase contract from 1984, the property tax bills, all in my name. "He tried to take it from you," Harold muttered, looking through them. "But he can't. Legally, he doesn't have a leg to stand on. Evelyn, this house is yours. Every inch." "I want to sell it," I said. "As soon as possible." He raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure?" "Yes." He didn't question it, just nodded slowly. "I'll draw up the necessary protections. You'll need a realtor. I already have someone in mind." I left Harold's place and walked 2 blocks to a small real estate office with a glass door and a purple sign that read, Maria Santos Realty. Maria was young, bright-eyed, in her early 30s. She was the daughter of a woman I once worked with at the post office, and I remembered her coming in after school to do homework at the counter. I told her what I needed. "I want it listed this week. No delays, no open houses. Just show it privately to serious buyers only." Maria blinked, then nodded. "Understood. I'll handle it personally." That evening we met at the house, my house. I waited in the car while she walked around, taking photos, making notes. I didn't want to go inside. Not anymore. When she returned, she handed me a clipboard. "The market's hot," she said. "You'll get multiple offers if we move fast. But first," she held out a pen, "you need to authorize the listing." I took the pen. I thought maybe my hand would shake, that I'd hesitate, but I didn't. My signature was steady, my heart even steadier. The sound of that pen scratching across the paper was the softest rebellion I'd ever made, and the loudest thing I'd ever said to my son. That night, I didn't go back to the motel. I booked a new hotel closer to downtown and fell asleep with the curtains open, letting the city lights remind me I was no longer living under anyone else's roof. I was reclaiming my own. Maria moved faster than I expected, faster than I dared to hope. At exactly 7:30 a.m., her listing went live. 3 beautiful photos, a simple description of the property's character, location, and potential. No mention of the current occupants, just this: charming 4-bedroom home with mature garden and updated fixtures. Ownership since 1984. By 9 a.m., her phone was buzzing non-stop. By noon, she had shown the property virtually to 2 cash buyers from out of state and 1 young couple moving for work. And by 3 p.m. there were 3 offers on the table, all full price or higher. The first was a tech worker who wanted a quiet place to relax. The second was a pair of brothers looking to renovate and flip. The third was a divorced woman in her 40s named Linda who had recently gotten a settlement and was looking for somewhere to start over. I chose Linda, not because of the money, though hers was the cleanest offer, all cash, but because she spoke to Maria with the kind of voice I used to have, tired, kind, and strong. Maria texted me the contract. I reviewed it in silence, my reading glasses sitting low on my nose, hands steady. I clicked sign. It was done. By sunset, the house was no longer mine, but also no longer his. I sat in my motel room, watching the orange light spill over the blinds, the sky fading into shades of purple and gray. My phone buzzed beside me. David. I didn't answer. The next call came 15 minutes later, then another, then another. By the time I had finished brushing my teeth, he had called 6 times. No voicemail, no text. He didn't want to explain. He wanted control. I set the phone on silent and placed it face down on the nightstand. The next morning, David's world shifted. At 8 a.m., a courier arrived at his door with a certified envelope. Inside, the legal transfer of ownership, signed, notarized, final. The property now belonged to Linda Martinez, effective immediately. Along with it was a formal notice of tenancy termination. 7 days to move out, or the new owner had the right to pursue legal eviction. The envelope had my name in the sender line. Not Mom, not Evelyn, just E. Collins. I imagine David stood there for a while, rereading the pages, searching for some mistake, some missing piece, but there wasn't one. What he never understood, not once, was that I never needed to scream. I only needed to remember what was mine and use it. By noon, Maria texted to let me know she had received a voicemail from someone sounding panicked. David had called her, pretending to be the true homeowner, trying to dispute the sale. Maria simply replied, "All documentation is verified and filed with county records. Mrs. Collins is the sole legal owner and has executed her rights within full capacity. This conversation is over." David then called me 7 times. He left one message. "Mom, what are you doing? You can't sell this house. We live here. Are you losing your mind? Call me back, please. This isn't funny." That word again. He never said you. He never once said you built this, or you lived here first, or I'm sorry. In his mind we lived there and now we were being removed. But there was no we, just him. By dinner time my phone had rung 18 times. I didn't pick up once. I watched the sun dip low over the skyline through the motel curtains. Outside, cars moved like ants through glowing rivers of traffic. Inside, I sipped the same kind of tea Robert used to make me during stormy nights. David didn't leave a second voicemail. He knew by then I wasn't bluffing and I wasn't coming back. It didn't take long for the neighbors to notice. By Wednesday the whispers began. Cars slowed a little when passing the front of the house. Lawn sprinklers stopped just long enough for someone behind the hedges to mutter, "Is that the son getting kicked out?" By Friday the rumors had a rhythm. "He's getting evicted." "No, he's squatting." "Can you believe it?" His mother sold the house without saying a word. I thought that place was in the family. And the worst of all, the one that echoed long after doors closed. Imagine being thrown out of your mother's house. Can't even imagine. David heard them. He stepped outside that morning with his sunglasses on, bright white shirt, and his chin held unnaturally high. But the bags under his eyes and the tension in his jaw told the truth. He packed slowly, hoping anyone would step in, that I'd appear with a change of heart, that some miracle would undo the very thing he'd spent years daring me to do. But no miracle came. Just silence and a moving truck he had to pay for himself. When he finally wheeled his suitcases down the porch steps, 2 expensive cases packed to the brim, he clutched his phone like a lifeline. It buzzed every few minutes with spam, updates, unknown numbers, but not from me. Not once. He called again and again and again. I didn't pick up. Not because I was cruel, but because I had already said everything I needed to say. He had never heard me before. He'd only ever talked at me. And now my silence was the loudest message I could send. Sarah didn't help him carry a thing. She stood by the car, arms crossed, eyes distant. When he tried to hand her one of the bags, she stepped back. "I'm going to my sister's," she said flatly. "Sarah, wait." She didn't wait for him to finish. She just shook her head, got in the car and drove off. He stood there alone on the curb with 2 suitcases and a phone no one answered. That night, around 8 p.m., I heard a knock at the security gate of my new apartment. I had just made tea, mint and chamomile. The city glowed beyond the glass, skyscrapers like tall candles flickering in the night. My new home smelled of wood polish and quiet, the kind of quiet I hadn't known in years. I checked the monitor. David. His hair was messy. He wasn't wearing sunglasses this time. His eyes were red and puffy. He buzzed again. Then he sat down on the sidewalk outside the gate. He didn't say anything at first, just looked up at the camera. His lips moved, trembling. And finally he spoke. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't move. Please," he whispered. "Just let me in. Just for a little while. I have nowhere to go." The intercom was silent. He put his hands together like he had when he was 6, praying for a new bike. Like that would work again. "Please, Mom." I watched for a moment longer. Then I stood, walked to the window, and pulled the curtain closed. I didn't do it with anger, just certainty. He had taught me a lesson I never wanted to learn. That even the ones you love most can cross a line. And sometimes you don't go back. My new apartment was on the 20th floor, nestled in the heart of the city, far above the noise but close enough to see it all. From my window, I watched the skyline breathe. Neon signs blinked. Car horns sang. Buildings stood like old friends, arms crossed against the wind. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. Fully paid for with the sale of the house. The first thing I did was set up a small herb garden on the balcony. Just mint mostly. Robert used to love the smell. I'd crush a leaf between my fingers some mornings and let the smell drift over my coffee. Peaceful. The apartment was quiet in the best way. Not silent like fear, quiet like rest. One evening, I made a cup of mint tea, pulled my shawl around my shoulders and stood at the window. As dusk folded the city into soft shades of purple and black, the phone buzzed. David. His name lit up the screen again. I watched it ring once. I didn't pick up. I turned the phone face down on the table. 10 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. I glanced at the camera. He was there again, his coat too thin for the night air, his hair messy. He held a backpack and stood beneath the street light like someone who had run out of time. "Mom," he said into the speaker, voice cracking. "Please let me stay. Just for a while. Just until I figure things out." I didn't answer right away. I watched him shift from foot to foot, cold and exposed. He had burned every bridge, thinking he'd never need to cross them again. I stepped out onto the balcony. He looked up and saw me, his face lighting up with hope, the kind that makes you wish you didn't have to be the one to put it out.